15 of Hollywood's biggest stars were living a lie every single day, and the studio spent millions making sure you never found out. We're talking about hair, or rather, the complete lack of it. Behind every perfectly styled leading man of the golden age lurked a secret that studios protected like classified information. Many of cinema's most iconic stars were actually balding or completely bald. Their legendary looks were nothing more than expertly crafted illusions. Today we're pulling back the curtain on 15 beloved stars whose famous hairstyles were Hollywood's most carefully guarded lies. And trust me, some of these names will shock you. The studios didn't just hide the secret, they weaponized it. Contracts included special hair care clauses, dedicated stylists traveled with stars like bodyguards, publicity departments airbrushed every photo. They even threatened lawsuits against anyone who dared mention the forbidden topic. The golden age of Hollywood was built on carefully constructed images. Stars weren't just actors. They were products, meticulously shaped by studio systems that controlled every detail of their lives. While audiences occasionally knew about nose jobs or dental work, one secret remained absolutely off-limits: the hairpiece. For male stars especially, masculinity and attractiveness were tied directly to a full head of hair. Baldness was treated like a contagious disease that required immediate quarantine. Because in the golden age, baldness wasn't just embarrassing for a leading man, it was career suicide. Let's examine 15 legendary actors whose famous locks were Hollywood's most successful con job. Starting with the tough guys who weren't so tough after all. Humphrey Bogart's slick back hair became as iconic as his trench coat in Casablanca. But by the time he was filming noir classics like The Maltese Falcon and The Big Sleep, Bogart was already significantly bald and completely dependent on hairpieces. Here's what's wild. Bogart started losing his hair in his early 30s when he was still playing villains. But when his breakthrough as a leading man came in 1941, his hairline suddenly became a studio emergency. Cinematographer Arthur Edison later spilled the beans. Lighting Bogart became increasingly challenging as his hairpieces became more obvious. They developed specific techniques just to hide the edges of his fake hair. Bogart knew exactly which angles worked and would quietly adjust his position if he felt the lighting might expose him. But here's the most telling detail. According to Lauren Bacall, Bogart never appeared without his hairpiece in public. He had a standing rule that no photographers were allowed near the swimming pool. The only place he'd remove his hairpiece was in the water, and he guarded that privacy like a state secret. The most heartbreaking part? During his final illness from cancer, Bogart continued wearing his hairpiece in the hospital. Even during his last days, he insisted on having it properly positioned. For a man whose tough guy image defined masculinity for an entire generation, this private vulnerability remained his most closely guarded secret until the very end. But Bogart wasn't the only tough guy hiding behind fake hair. John Wayne's rugged masculinity made him America's definitive cowboy for decades. But the Duke's iconic image included a carefully crafted Hollywood lie. His full head of hair had actually begun disappearing well before he reached fame. Wayne started losing his hair in his late 30s, right around his breakthrough with Stagecoach. By the early 50s, Wayne was wearing hairpieces in nearly all his films. But here's what made his situation unique. His hairpieces were specifically designed to look rough and weathered, perfect for his frontier persona. The real challenge came during those physically demanding Western shoots. Filming in dusty, windy places like Monument Valley created nightmare scenarios for keeping hairpieces in place. Wayne's costume assistant revealed they used a specially designed bandana under his cowboy hat to keep everything secure during gallops and stunts. Wayne was reportedly more practical about his hairpiece than most stars. He viewed it as simply another piece of his costume. Wayne himself once told a young actor, "This damn thing's hotter than a tin roof in August, but the ladies seem to like it, so on it stays." And speaking of practical approaches, James Stewart took a completely different strategy. James Stewart built his entire appeal on being relatable. His folksy manner made him Hollywood's definitive everyman, which makes the secret he kept for decades even more surprising. Stewart relied on hairpieces for much of his career, but his were designed specifically to maintain his unpretentious image. Here's what's fascinating. Unlike stars who panicked at the first sign of thinning, Stewart actually let his natural hair loss show in his early films. In classics like It's a Wonderful Life, you can see his authentic receding hairline. This transparency aligned perfectly with his down-to-earth image. But as Stewart entered his 40s, his hair loss accelerated to the point where it started affecting his casting opportunities. Around the time of his Hitchcock collaborations like Rear Window, Stewart began wearing hairpieces designed to look natural and slightly imperfect. His makeup artist revealed that Stewart specifically requested his hairpieces look like an ordinary man's hair. Slightly messy, not too perfect. He didn't want to look like he was trying too hard. What's remarkable is how Stewart's hairpieces evolved as he aged. Unlike some stars who maintained impossibly youthful hair into their senior years, Stewart allowed his artificial hair to thin and gray appropriately. Just another example of the authenticity that made him so beloved. But if you think these everyman types had it tough, the romantic leads faced even bigger challenges. If any Golden Age star embodied physical perfection, it was Cary Grant. His immaculate appearance created a standard of male elegance that remains influential decades later. Yet the man once described as the man from Dream City maintained his dreamlike perfection with expertly crafted hairpieces. Grant began experiencing hair loss in his mid-30s, right when he was establishing himself as Hollywood's premier romantic leading man. For a star whose appeal was so connected to physical perfection, this was a potential career disaster. Here's how expensive Grant's vanity was. His makeup artist revealed that Grant's hairpieces cost roughly 10 times what the average star spent. They were constructed with each hair individually knotted into a base made of material so fine it was nearly invisible, even in close-ups. Grant didn't just have one hairpiece. He traveled with multiple versions, each slightly different for various situations. For romantic comedies like The Philadelphia Story, his hairpiece would be perfectly styled. For more rugged roles, a slightly messier variation would be used. What distinguished Grant's approach was how his hairpieces evolved as he aged. Unlike stars who maintained implausibly youthful hair, Grant allowed his artificial hair to gray naturally. This subtle authenticity helped maintain the illusion. Grant was extremely private about his situation, but occasionally showed humor with close friends. Director Alfred Hitchcock once recalled Grant referring to his hairpiece as realistic therapy for a traumatic condition. Grant insisted it wasn't vanity, but good business sense. The public pays to see Cary Grant, not a bald man they don't recognize. Speaking of business sense, Frank Sinatra turned his hairpiece into entertainment gold. Frank Sinatra's evolution from skinny Bobby Soxer idol to sophisticated chairman of the board included a physical transformation that went largely unnoticed by his adoring public. Sinatra started wearing hairpieces around 1954, roughly the same time he was rebuilding his career with his Oscar-winning performance in From Here to Eternity. What makes Sinatra's case fascinating is how his hairpieces became an open secret within the Rat Pack. During their famous Vegas performances, Dean Martin would sometimes make oblique references to Sinatra's Little Helper up top, much to the audience's delight and Sinatra's mixed amusement. Sammy Davis Jr. later revealed that Sinatra had a complex relationship with his hairpiece. Frank was sensitive about it with strangers, but with friends, he'd sometimes use it as a prop. Once, after a particularly wild night, he sent his hairpiece in a box to Dean Martin with a note saying, "Even I needed the day off to recover." Unlike some stars who maintained strict secrecy, Sinatra occasionally acknowledged his situation through humor. During a 1965 recording session, Sinatra reportedly removed his hairpiece during a break, placed it on a microphone stand, and quipped, "Even the damn thing needs a rest between takes." As Tony Bennett once observed, Frank could make anything seem cool, even something most men would be embarrassed about. He wore the hairpiece. The hairpiece didn't wear him. But if you think Sinatra's situation was complex, wait until you hear about the technical challenges some stars faced. Fred Astaire's seemingly effortless elegance extended to his perfectly styled hair that never seemed to fall out of place, even during his most vigorous dance routines. What audiences didn't realize was that Astaire was performing with an invisible dance partner, a meticulously crafted hairpiece. Astaire began losing his hair in his late 20s. The extraordinary challenge was keeping a hairpiece securely in place while performing routines that included jumps, spins, and even dancing on the ceiling. His makeup artist worked with Max Factor to develop a special adhesive that could withstand perspiration and rapid movement. Astaire's hairpieces were constructed with a silk base rather than standard lace, which allowed better adhesion during strenuous numbers. What's remarkable is that despite performing some of the most athletic dance routines in film history, there's not a single documented instance of his hairpiece ever coming loose during filming, a testament to both Hollywood innovation and Astaire's precise awareness of his movements. His dance partner, Ginger Rogers, once commented, with characteristic wit, "I had to remember not to run my fingers through his hair during romantic scenes. Fred would have never forgiven me if I dislodged his little friend." Speaking of physical challenges, Burt Lancaster faced even more extreme situations. Burt Lancaster's powerful physical presence defined his screen image. The former circus acrobat brought athletic dynamism that few actors could match. Yet by his late 30s, Lancaster was experiencing significant hair loss that required increasingly elaborate hairpieces. Films like The Crimson Pirate required Lancaster to perform his own stunts, drawing on his acrobatic background for scenes involving rope swinging and elaborate sword fights. His stunt coordinator revealed that Lancaster's hairpieces needed special reinforcement because of his stunts. They developed a system using spirit gum and fine mesh that could withstand somersaults and fight scenes without shifting. Lancaster maintained a practical attitude about his hairpieces. If it needed adjustment between takes, he'd call for his hairdresser without any self-consciousness, the same way he'd call for a prop adjustment. His longtime friend, Kirk Douglas, once recalled their running joke about Lancaster's performance enhancer. Douglas would tease him that he had an unfair advantage with women because of his extra help up top. Lancaster would fire back that Douglas was just jealous because his natural hair didn't look as good as his purchased hair. And then there's the story of Hollywood's most famous transformation. Sean Connery's relationship with hairpieces presents one of Hollywood's most interesting evolutions. Connery began losing his hair remarkably early, already showing significant baldness by his mid-20s. When he was cast as James Bond, producers immediately recognized that the suave secret agent required a full head of hair. Throughout all his Bond films, Connery wore increasingly elaborate hairpieces that became integral to 07's debonair image. His makeup artist revealed that Connery's Bond hairpieces were constructed with special reinforced bases to withstand fights, underwater scenes, and romantic encounters. However, as he entered his 40s, Connery made a decision almost unprecedented for a leading man of his stature. He stopped wearing hairpieces for most roles, allowing his significant natural baldness to be visible on screen. This transition is most evident comparing his appearance in Diamonds Are Forever, where he still wears a full hairpiece as Bond, with The Offense in 1973, where he appears with his natural baldness clearly visible. Director Sidney Lumet recalled Connery's reasoning. "Sean told me he was tired of the discomfort and artifice of hairpieces. He said, 'I'm not Bond anymore, let's show the real me.' It was a brave decision few stars would have made." What makes Connery's choice remarkable is that it didn't diminish his leading man status. His natural appearance in films like The Hunt for Red October established a new paradigm for mature masculine appeal, proving that baldness could be compatible with continuing sex symbol status. But perhaps the most unusual hairpiece story belongs to a star who didn't need one. Yul Brynner presents the most ironic case in our examination, an actor who actually had hair, but shaved his head for a role, only to discover that his bald appearance was so distinctive that it became his trademark. Brynner's iconic bald look originated with his role as the King in The King and I. Although he was experiencing some natural hair thinning, Brynner still had reasonable hair when he made the bold decision to completely shave his head for the role. After discovering the distinctive power of his bald appearance, Brynner continued to shave his head for the remainder of his career, recognizing that this unique look set him apart in an industry filled with conventionally styled leading men. The irony emerged when he occasionally needed to wear hairpieces for roles that required him to appear with hair. For films like Solomon and Sheba, Brynner wore custom-made wigs, creating the unusual circumstance of a naturally balding man who deliberately made himself completely bald, having to artificially appear to have hair. His makeup artist recalled that Brynner approached wigs simply as costume elements. He had absolutely no ego attached to them because his real persona was the bald appearance he had chosen. Speaking of unusual approaches, Spencer Tracy handled his situation with characteristic subtlety. Spencer Tracy's reputation as cinema's most natural actor stands in ironic contrast to the artificial help he required. Tracy began wearing hairpieces in the early 50s, But MGM approached his transition with unusual subtlety. Rather than suddenly giving him a full head of hair, Tracy's pieces were initially designed to look like the slightly thinning hair of a middle-aged man. Over time, they gradually made them fuller, but never to the point where audiences would notice the change. Tracy reportedly approached his hairpieces with the same pragmatic attitude he brought to every aspect of his profession. What gives Tracy's situation a unique dimension is his relationship with Katharine Hepburn, who was reportedly one of the few people with whom Tracy felt comfortable enough to remove his hairpiece. And Bob Hope turned his hairpiece into occasional comedy gold. Bob Hope's 6-decade career made him one of America's most beloved figures. Hope began wearing hairpieces in the early 40s, but his situation presented unique requirements. His hairpiece needed to withstand the physical comedy and rapid movements that characterized his performances. What makes Hope's case interesting is how his hairpiece occasionally became part of his comedic toolkit. In private performances for military troops, Hope would sometimes incorporate his hairpiece into his routine, adjusting it deliberately during moments when he pretended to be flustered. What distinguished Hope's hairpiece was its remarkable consistency over decades. Hope maintained essentially the same appearance from the 40s through the 90s, a stability that became part of his brand. But not every star handled their situation with such eventual comfort. William Holden's transformation from fresh-faced golden boy to cynical anti-hero paralleled a physical change that Hollywood carefully concealed. Holden began losing his hair in his early 30s and had begun wearing hairpieces by the time he won his Academy Award for Stalag 17. What made Holden's situation unique was his apparent discomfort with the whole thing. Director Billy Wilder once observed that Holden had no vanity about his appearance except for the hair situation. That bothered him because he felt it was inauthentic. By the 60s, as Holden's personal struggles began affecting his appearance, his hairpieces became more obvious. The contrast between publicity photos and his on-screen appearance became increasingly pronounced. And finally, Cesar Romero took perhaps the most relaxed approach of all. Cesar Romero's 6-decade career spanned from Latin lover roles to his iconic Joker in Batman. What makes Romero's case interesting is how his hairpieces became more rather than less noticeable as his career progressed. By the time he appeared as the Joker, his hairpiece had become quite obvious, creating a slightly artificial appearance that actually complemented the campy tone of the series. His makeup artist recalled that Romero had a unique attitude. He wasn't particularly concerned if people noticed. He used to say, "I'm playing a part either way. What difference does it make if the hair is part of the performance too?" This relaxed attitude extended to how he handled his hairpiece on set. Romero was known to casually adjust his if it became dislodged during action scenes, or remove it entirely during breaks if the weather was hot. So, what do all these stories tell us about Hollywood's golden age? These 15 legendary performers reveal fascinating patterns in how Hollywood's most carefully guarded secret-shaped careers and screen personas. Each star's hairpiece became an integral part of their iconic screen presence. What emerges most clearly is how each star's relationship with their hairpiece reflected broader aspects of their persona. The perfectionists, like Cary Grant, demanded flawless pieces. The natural performers, like James Stewart, insisted on pieces that looked imperfect. The pragmatists, like John Wayne, viewed hairpieces as simply another tool of their trade. What's particularly striking is how successfully this secret was maintained throughout the Golden Age. In an era before internet scrutiny, audiences largely accepted their screen idols' appearances without question. The careful lighting, strategic camera angles, and meticulous maintenance created convincing illusions. This collective agreement to maintain the illusion extended beyond studios and stars to the entertainment press, which rarely mentioned hairpieces. This code of silence preserved the carefully constructed images that audiences had emotionally invested in. Perhaps the most valuable insight from these stories is recognizing how this small deception served a larger truth, creating memorable characters and personas that continue to resonate decades later. The hairpieces that helped Bogart embody Rick in Casablanca, or Wayne personify Western masculinity, were ultimately minor details in creating performances that have achieved cultural immortality. As Fred Astaire once reportedly told a young actor, "They don't remember whether you had hair, they remember whether you could dance." And there you have it, 15 iconic Hollywood legends whose famous hairstyles were actually carefully crafted illusions. The perfect hair was never just about vanity. It was an essential component of the characters and images that made these actors into cultural icons. Which of these stars surprised you the most? Had you ever noticed hints of these hidden hair pieces in your favorite classic films?